Hello, in this video I'm going to be looking at the 50TP Prototyp. Reason being, there is currently a clan challenge going on, and this is, well, seems to be the most popular choice for the tank people want to go for, and it does make sense because this one is definitely the most interesting, unique vehicle out of these four tanks. So, the 50TP Prototyp, this is a special Tier 9 heavy tank. It's never available in the store, in auctions, in any events other than the clan challenge events, and the only way to obtain the 50TP Proto is by getting ingots and then redeeming the tank from the store during clan events. And of course, ingots are earned by doing clan missions and platoons. But let's get right into the tank. So there is, of course, a review on my website if you do want to have a look at what this tank is all about without this commentary. But in terms of armour, you can see here, its armour is decent on the hull. It does have a fair few weak points around the, well, turret ring area underneath the turret, and of course the lower plate is also weak. But other than that, its upper plate is actually pretty decent because it is an auto ricochet angle, which means that all AP, APCR will bounce off, and even if enemies load heat, they're going to have a very hard time going through just due to it also being a pretty decent thickness. But the turret is also very strong. You can see there's no weak points at all, including the cupola, which is fairly strong on the edges, though enemies can penetrate the center area, which is fairly weak. But if you do angle the hull, you can see enemies can penetrate the sides under the turret ring fairly easily just due to how it is angled, and you'll be able to see that here. You can see when you do turn the hull, there's just really not too much point to doing it because it really just makes your hull weaker, since this area on the edge of the driver's hatch does become, well, not an auto ricochet anymore, so not too much point to angling, and you definitely can't side scrape. But if you switch to premium ammo, which in this case is 300 heat, which is quite low heat penetration, but it doesn't really matter for this tank, you can see there is no change to the hull armor at all, again because the upper plates are a very strong thickness, and heat can't even go through as it is just very high thickness. But you can see that on the top of the turret there are weak points, and this is due to it being an auto ricochet to AP, yet heat of course does ignore the auto ricochet angle and easily penetrates through its fairly low 300mm of thickness. And you can see what I mean with the auto ricochet. If you go above the tank, you'll see that the angles instantly become an easy penetration just because they are no longer a 70-degree angle, but then as soon as you get to that 70 degrees, the shell will bounce off. And of course, heat ignoring that does mean that these are a weak point when enemies do load their heat ammo. But other than this, you can see that it's a fairly decent armor profile for the turret. As long as enemies don't have heat, this is what they see, which means it's very reliable. Of course, using gun depression, you can see here versus 300mm heat, that weak point underneath the cupolas at the top of the turret is gone, but you do have to watch out for the driver's hatch sticking above the ridgeline, as you can see in this top image, as of course the driver's hatch does extend out forward on the hull, and it is a weak point, so even when you do use your full gun depression, if you overextend the hull, that driver's hatch is going to be exposed. So try not to go over the ridgeline any more than you need to, because it would expose that driver's hatch. Overall though, a pretty good armor profile for the 50TP. Maybe not for a regular heavy tank, but do note this tank is quite a mobile, quick heavy, so you'll see that in a moment when I go over the mobility. But in terms of the gun, this tank mounts a 122 with AP, APCR and HE ammo loadout. Penetration is 248 on standard, which is decent but nothing amazing. 320 on premium, which is very good because it's APCR. Not when you use calibrated, but considering this tank would usually be using gun rammer, APCR is actually quite good on this tank, as generally APCR has less penetration than heat, So in this case, very nice penetration. HE also very good, 68mm, is higher than the usual 65 or 61, and with this tank's fairly nice 560 HE damage, it is also quite a significant amount of damage and HE usability. Damage itself for AP and APCR is 440, which is sort of the middle ground for tier 8 heavies. It's between tanks like the IS-8 and tanks like the E75, which has 460. Its DPM is quite low though, 2200. It is more similar to tanks like the Moistion, E75, those sorts of vehicles, with an almost 12-second reload. Again, your alpha is 20 less than tanks like the E75, so your DPM isn't exactly better either. So not impressive in terms of the DPM. But where it is good is the accuracy and aim time. Aim time for 440 alpha is actually pretty good, 3.6 seconds. Base aim time, not that impressive, 2.55, but the reason the estimated aim time is good is because this tank has amazing dispersion on move. So 0.15, 0.15, 0.1 is only worse than tanks like the Kampfpanzer 07PE or the Object 752. Other than those tanks, it's essentially the best of any tier 9 heavy, and combined with pretty good dispersion of 0.335, this gun feels consistent and accurate. On top of this, very nice show velocities, 1000 on standard ammo, and 8 degrees of gun depression, which is just very comfortable. This is just a comfortable, consistent gun, which is so nice to use, and it makes quite a difference when you're used to these sort of less accurate guns such as the BZ68 or E75 or tanks like that. This one, considering it only loses 20 alpha compared to those vehicles, it is just so nice to actually be accurate and consistent. Also, despite having not the best DPM, this tank has got tungsten shells, which does mean you can boost up the alpha damage in battle to 506 when tungsten shells is activated, which does help, of course, for shutting down low HP tanks and trading. Overall though, a great gun. Next, mobility. Again, in conjunction with Armour, this tank is very quick, 45 base top speed, 15 in reverse, which is fairly average, but a very nice power to weight of 16.6. And on hard terrain, it has 1.1 terrain resistance, so it loses a small amount of its true acceleration, but 15.1 still very good for a heavy tank, and there's really not too many issues reaching your 45 top speed along flat ground. Traverse speed also great, 41 degrees per second on hard, 35 on medium is also still very good, and its acceleration on medium is still pretty decent at 12.8 horsepower per ton. But that is not it for mobility. You have improved gear oil, which really helps this tank, mainly in the reverse speed department. 15 to 19 kilometers of reverse speed is a massive difference, and of course for a heavy tank, reverse speed is a very powerful stat to have, especially when you have got a nice pokey gun with good alpha for trading. On top of this, it increases your top speed to 49, increases your acceleration rate by 0.8 or 0.7 on hard terrain, 0.6 on medium, I believe, and your traverse speed goes up by roughly 1.5 degrees compared to if you used small food. So it is very nice to have this improved gear oil on the 50TP, especially as this tank is a mobile heavy, and it is all about that speed and turret armor. But other than this, let's get into the equipment, well, how to equip the tank. Consumables, I would definitely run adrenaline combined with tungsten and of course multi-purpose repair. If you do want to drop out one of these, I would say drop adrenaline, as this tank isn't about the DPM, it's more about damage trading, as its DPM isn't impressive, its reload is not impressive, but I run both, that's just my personal choice. Next, improved gear oil on top of regular fuel and food. Don't use improved gunpowder because this tank has already got good shell velocities, and the trade-off compared to these 3 other consumables is not worth it. So next, moving to equipment, in terms of gun rammer or calibrated shells, I would definitely say go with gun rammer. This tank doesn't have heat, so it doesn't benefit massively on its premium ammo. Its HE isn't really that special, so you don't really need it for HE use, and its AP penetration is perfectly fine. On top of this, for its 440 alpha, its DPM and reload time are definitely not impressive. While yes, this tank isn't about DPM or really shooting fast, and it's more of a damage trader, its DPM still isn't that good for 440 alpha, so I would definitely still go with the gun rammer, since it does help in brawly situations, as you will see in one of the replays in a moment. Next, engine accelerator, because this tank does have very good top speed, and you do still need the better acceleration to be able to actually utilize that. On top of that, its traverse speed is already very good for a heavy tank. Next, improved assembly. Don't use enhanced armor, it's completely useless on this tank. Reason being, the 50TP Prototyp has auto ricochet hull, and its turret is stronger than would benefit from enhanced armor. So really, using this doesn't do anything for the hull, and the turret doesn't need improvements, so it's better to use improved assembly. Next, gun lane drive, just because this tank, out of the three gun handling stats, the aim time is definitely the least impressive. On top of this, it has already great shell velocities, so it doesn't need supercharger. Refined gun or vertical stabilizer will really be down to your personal choice. You could use vertical stabilizer to improve the effective aim time, just because this tank's base aim time is fairly slow. Again though, that's a personal choice. This tank already has great on-move handling, so using refined gun also works well, just to help improve its snapshot capability. But next, toolbox, just for faster repair, and then consumable delivery system, because I want to be using these consumables more often rather than for longer. On top of this, if you use high-end consumables, you don't get an extra shot out of tungsten shells. It just gives you sort of more of a downtime while the consumable is active. At most, you can only get off 2 shots with tungsten shells, no matter what equipment you're using. So for me, I'm going with consumable delivery system. But next, I will show 2 replays in this tank. The first one is on mines. So on this map, of course, going to start on a bit of a downward incline, so you'll really be able to see this tank reaching its top speed fairly quickly. But of course I'm going towards the hill, just because this tank has got everything it needs to be a hull down ridgeline vehicle. It's got the gun depression, it's got the mobility to reach the hill quickly before enemy tanks, and then it's got the alpha damage to trade. And of course the turret armor to bounce. That's rather the most important point. But you can see here, I'm not going to poke up there just because that's where usually the TDs are aiming. I'm going to push forward and use APCR on the gun mantlet of this XM. You'll see there he bounces his standard ammo, which is the APCR, off my turret front. But that won't be happening again as the XM does start to load premium, which for the XM of course is heat, and you'll see that weak point which I mentioned just now coming into effect there. You can see where he penetrates, which is right under the cupola at the top of the turret, which of course for heat is no problem to penetrate. And since I'm not using my full gun depression, I can't really hide that weak point. You'll see here though, once again, we trade equally. Him going right through my turret, using heat again, and I go through his gun mantlet using premium ammo. But this is essentially the hull down gameplay of the 50TP Prototyp. Very normal sort of hull down gameplay, and this tank can play it well just because despite its fairly unimpressive hull armor, its turret is still very good. You'll see I was trying to go for that sort of viewport weak point on the XM, but I do miss, which allows him to survive. But now I'm going to make a poor push up. Luckily I do bounce the griller and get a shot in, but I do take a shot from the Caro. Then I'm going to make the same mistake again. and push forward, not knowing what enemy to go for, taking a shot and then panicking my shot on the chieftain, which goes into the bridge. I believe my gun was damaged there, hence why the accuracy was quite bad. But you can see this tank works well hull down. I have blocked 2,160 damage from enemies just bouncing off my turret or the upper plate, which the grill unfortunately hit when I pushed over the ridge. But now I'm going to take a blind shot on the 183, who ricochets, or well, doesn't manage to do any damage with their Hesh, which goes right onto the front of this tank's turret, which really shows how thick the front of the turret is, since even the 183's Hesh, which would usually do some splash damage, does nothing. So when you are using your full gun impression, you can be really very confident in this tank's armour. And there again, bouncing the Caro's premium APCR shell right off the turret. So here I'm going to activate Tungsten. You can see I do 490 damage, which is nice as it does take the Caro down a bit more on hit points, though it's not going to matter too much. Now he's down to 270. And the Guerrilla 15 is now the last tank left. I'm going to play a bit cautious because of course the Guerrilla 15 is very accurate and reloads very quickly, so I'm going to try and play it a bit slow against him, take a few blind shots just to not risk dying here. So in late game situations, not in this one, the mobility does come in useful, you'll see it in a moment, but in closer battles you'll find that being fast, like the 50TP Prototyp is a very useful trait for a heavy tank, especially when you're losing just by a bit, or when you're the last tank left against one or two enemies. Having that mobility does just allow you to be a bit more like a medium, which is so powerful for a heavy tank. You'll see there I was quite quick to be able to flank around the back of the Guerrilla 15 and shut him down, which is of course a nice trait of having such a mobile, quick heavy. But not really using it too much in that battle, as I was just sitting hull down, and you can see blocks 3,700 damage, dealt 3,351, and of course, as really no one plays this tank that much, that was an ace. But the next battle I will be using the mobility a bit more, and not so much the armour. So in this battle, it is on Yukon. I'm going to go straight into the factory area, and you'll see on this flat ground I'm going to be able to accelerate up quite quickly due to this tank's nice engine power and, well, acceleration rate. You'll also be able to see as I get into position much quicker than any of the enemy heavy tanks here. And you'll see already I'm up to, well, I was up to 46 kilometers per hour. But now I am in position just waiting for the enemy tanks. But yeah, in this battle, I'll be essentially not using the armor so much. While I am hull down here, I'm going to be more running around, trying to avoid the enemies from actually shooting my relatively unimpressive hull, as there is not too much hull down cover to use here. But in this battle, I play the tank more sort of like a heavium or a medium. I would compare it to sort of like a Chimera, in terms of how the tank is used in a situation where you can't really hide the hull. At least that's how I feel about the vehicle. You'll see here I do come around for the Kranvang, but I don't notice the tank to the side. It's lucky I only take one shot from the mouse and then one from this TPP. But you'll see here, once the hull is exposed, you're not really bouncing any shots, just because this tank does have a large lower plate and a fair few weak points around the turret area. But luckily the mouse does bounce off due to this tank's auto ricochet angles. I guess he hit. And now, since my allied heavies are dead, I'm going to try run away a bit. You'll see there the very nice gun handling accuracy of this tank does now allow me to put a shot on the Waffenträger. and luckily he misses. But here you'll see what I mean about playing the tank with no cover really. When pushing out, I have to expose the tank, and since this tank's side armour is pretty poor, I can't side scrape or do anything like that. My hull is just exposed. So here unfortunately I do take 2 shots from the AMX. Luckily the concept does bounce, so you can see still this tank's relatively trollish upper plate does sometimes come in handy, as I have still bounced a few shots in this round. But here I finally activate tungsten shells, which is a mistake I definitely made in this battle, not using tungsten enough. You definitely should use it as much as possible, just because you don't have to fire on reload to get out any benefit from tungsten shells. Even connecting 1 shot will give you benefit. But here you can see I do manage to shut down that concept using this tank's nice alpha damage. Unfortunately though, this Sheridan is going for the Waffenträger, I'm going for the AMX, which causes us to kind of intercept each other's paths. But Waffenträger goes down, and I have done 4,000 damage. But yeah, in that battle you could see I wasn't really using the armor too much, but still somehow managed to ricochet a few shots of the funny angles that this tank has. Once again, another ace, as people don't really play this tank for some reason, despite a lot of people having it, and despite it being a good tank. But yeah, in that battle you could see sort of playing it a bit more like a medium or a heavium, where you're running around using a bit more of the mobility to get into cover rather than trying to use the armor to bounce. Though that's not to say I didn't bounce anything in that battle. But yeah, 50TP Prototyp. This one is definitely a very interesting, unique vehicle, and definitely the one I'd recommend to go for out of these 4 tanks if you don't have any. Of course, if you don't like playing heavies, then go for a different vehicle, but if you don't have any of these and you're perfectly fine with heavy tank gameplay, this is definitely the one to choose. It's fast, it's got turret armor, it's got great accuracy, it's got nice alpha, it's got tungsten shells, and it's got good gun depression. It just feels so comfortable to play, and it is really quite a unique heavy tank. But yeah, that is it for the 50TP Proto. Thanks for watching.